All right. Now that we sort of have a handle on what dissonance is and the place of cognitive dissonance theory historically in social and broadly in all of psychology, I want to talk about specific types of dissonance and sort of how they might arise and what sorts of changes they might lead to. So these three are insufficient justification, effort justification, and post-decision justification. And you'll notice they all have justification in the name because what we're doing when we change our attitudes or rationalize a behavior, we're justifying why we did it. We are making those things fit together when they previously may not have. So the first one I want to talk about is insufficient justification. This one basically says a person really, they might have engaged in a behavior and they don't really know why. Maybe it was something negative, maybe it was something out of the ordinary, but they're looking around and there's nothing situational that's leading them to engage in that behavior necessarily. So they want to kind of figure out, well, why did I do that? And generally, a way you can very easily do that is think of an internal justification. Hey, nothing was forcing me to do this. I must have wanted to do it, or it must fit with my values in some way. And doing that is often going to involve adding a cognition or changing a cognition or a belief to kind of make things consonant again, make them fit together. The probably most famous example of insufficient justification is from a study that Leon Festinger did with one of his undergrad students at the time, Merrill Carlsmith. And your lead textbook author, Elliot Aronson, actually was involved in this study a bit too, helping them kind of stage it because it was a little bit complicated. But the participants in this study were given an incredibly boring task to do. You see these wooden kind of rectangular objects on the side. They're kind of screwed into this other piece of wood, and participants were asked for a full hour to turn each of those a quarter turn at a time and just do it, hundreds and hundreds of times over the course of an hour with no explanation, no other aspects of the study. So they had to do this very, very boring task. And then they were asked, hey, will you tell the next participant that this task was fun? The person that we usually have telling them that it's a fun thing to do isn't here. So we need somebody to fill in. Would you tell the next person that this task was fun, even though, maybe you didn't think it was, but just tell them it was fun? And they offered them compensation to make this very obvious lie to another person who was actually in on the study. They were a Confederate. So the independent variable then is whether they were paid a small or large amount to make this lie. The small amount, $1. The large amount was $20, which in the 1950s is nothing to sneeze at. That's a pretty good amount of money for another quick thing you're doing after a study. And they wanted to see after they've done this task, told somebody that it was fun and gotten paid for it, then let's ask them how much they enjoyed it. And they wanted to see if that led to any differences. And lo and behold, it did. It led to very large differences between these two groups. So people's thought process here might be like, well, I just told that other person that the task was fun, but I wasn't really paid very much. I only got $1 to do this. So why did I lie to them? Well, maybe I did think it was fun. If you didn't have that external justification, then you needed to come up with some explanation for why you did it. People that had the large amount of money, that could serve as their external justification. They could say, "Oof, I got paid $20 to lie to this sucker. Like, who cares?" But if you only got paid $1, then people are like, "Wow, would I really lie just for $1?" So they're coming up with these new explanations and saying, "No, I did think it was fun. Actually, that was a great time turning wooden things small amounts for an hour." So this is, kind of the classic dissonance study that people talk about, and it's a good example of this insufficient justification. The next type is effort justification. This arises when we spend a lot of time or effort or resources to accomplish something. And then, that thing that you accomplish, whether it's like, getting a job or being part of some group like a team or a fraternity or sorority or something, there might be a lot of effort involved in getting into that group or accomplishing that thing. And you might feel eventually like, well, I need to justify all of this work I put into it. This group that I now belong to must be awesome, or this must be my dream job that I work so hard to get, even if you don't necessarily like it all that much. So one aspect of this was a study by another your textbook author, Aronson, who had people try to get into this group that was like a study group, basically, and it was about uh, a class on human sexuality, and they had to have people do the thing they called an embarrassment test to become part of the group, basically. So they had different conditions. They had either no initiation to get into this study group, um, where they didn't have to do anything. They had a mild condition where they had to say like, hey, if you're going to be part of this group, you got to be comfortable saying things related to sex for our human sexuality class. So they had to read 5 sex-related words aloud. And in the severe condition, they had to read 12 explicit words and some vivid descriptions of sexual activity aloud to the group. So they're saying either no embarrassment, a little embarrassment, or a lot of embarrassment. And what they're basically predicting is if people have to, put themselves on a limb and expend all this effort in the severe condition to be embarrassed, they are going to like the group more later on. So they had people then listen to a recorded group discussion after that, and then rate what they thought about that group that they are now going to get to be part of, supposedly. And people that were in the severe condition rated the group as much more interesting and much more desirable to be part of than people that were in the mild or control condition. Because these people that were in the severe condition, they are looking for a justification for all that effort they put forth. And they change their attitudes about the group by saying, yeah, this is a really interesting discussion. It was worth it for me to embarrass myself. Now, additional context for this study, a couple of male researchers asking what were actually all female participants to read sexually explicit words aloud. This is another study that probably would not and should not be done today because it is basically just like a scientific instance of sexual harassment in a lot of ways. But it's still, the evidence still shows us something that demonstrates this effect quite well. This also comes up when we think about like hazing, right? So sororities, fraternities, sports teams, work groups, law enforcement, armed forces, there is a lot of effort that you have to go through to get into a lot of these groups. And some of them involved explicit things like hazing, for example. And I know there are federal laws against hazing. There are many places that have local laws against hazing. Usually universities are very much against hazing, but it still happens. And it is part of why people are so tied to their Greek organizations or these other examples. Because you might be thinking, I'm an independent person who makes their own decisions. And I just did this incredibly embarrassing, disgusting, dangerous, difficult, whatever thing. Well, man, this group must be awesome. I wouldn't have done that if this group wasn't extremely important to me and very beneficial. So it's actually a very ingenious thing for groups to do to force people to do dehumanizing things to get them to basically invest themselves even more into the groups. And then you have people saying, after the fact, like, I had to do it, you have to do it, sorts of things. So it's just a cycle that keeps going on. Last example I'll mention this. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's probably like at least part an apocryphal type of story. But Ben Franklin reportedly was someone who took advantage of the effort justification principle so much that people started calling it in some circles the Ben Franklin effect. That he would just ask people to do favors for him constantly. And even if there are people that didn't like him, sometimes they would do them. And in hindsight, they're thinking like, why'd I do a favor for that old jerk that we disagree on everything about? And they would then reportedly be a little more willing to acquiesce to what he wanted politically. So again, this is an alleged example, but I think it's at least a historical example that might make it kind of memorable. So I like to leave it in. But again, there's not super great evidence that this is exactly what happened, or that they didn't measure how much people actually changed their minds. Maybe there were other circumstances, but the story goes that he would ask people to do things, they would do them, and that effort that they expended on his behalf would lead them to rationalize their feelings about him and say, oh, that Franklin's not so bad. I'm going to vote with him, in the Continental Congress on the next, thing we're talking about. So last example of effort justification there. Okay, the last sort of flavor of dissonance that we're going to talk about is post-decision justification. So this arises when you have like two alternatives or even more. You have some alternatives and you have to pick one, and you don't really have good enough reasons to pick between two. You just kind of pick. Um, Reducing dissonance there, thinking like, well, why did I pick that? If you justify your choice and say, yeah, actually, the thing I picked is great, then you're going to feel better about that choice. So you're going to change your attitudes about the alternatives, about the options that you have. An early version of this was a study about consumer goods, where in the 50s, the only people that would of course be asked about anything to do with household goods were women, housewives. So they were the participants in this study, rightly or not. But they had women rate these household products for how desirable they were, how good they were, all these things. And they did that so they could pick uh, the options they were going to give women. So they manipulated, was the choice they gave them an easy one or a hard one? In the easy choice condition, they would give the women a choice between like their favorite and their least favorite thing. So of course they're always going to choose their favorite thing. In the hard choice condition, they might give them a choice between, say, their fourth favorite item and their fifth favorite item. You probably don't have too much differentiation between those or strong feelings about them. So they wanted to see then, when people have that hard choice between two very close alternatives, what are they going to do? Are they going to change their ratings? So they'd let them take this thing, and then they would ask them to rate things again. And in the easy condition, when it was obvious what choice you would make, the ratings did not change. But when it was difficult, when you had to like come up with reasons and basically like delude yourself into thinking that you made the right choice, the ratings would change. The one that you picked, you would say was better. The one you didn't pick, you'd say was worse. So like, I picked this coffee maker over the blender. You pick the coffee maker and you say, oh man, this is a really great coffee maker. I was right. It's the best coffee maker. I'm so glad I chose it. Screw that blender. It's the worst blender in the world. Even though like they don't actually have reasons to think those things, but you're doing this thing called spreading of alternatives. You're changing your mind about these things and making them seem further apart in your mind. So let's take another example. Like you're choosing between two cars you want to buy. Let's say a Prius and a Civic Hybrid. And let's say, no one actually probably does this, but you might rate them, say, before you're buying them. So while you're shopping, you rate the Prius as 7.75 and the Civic as 7.25. So they're not too far apart, right? Not a lot of differentiation there. But let's say you purchase the Prius and you think about it more later on. Your rating of the Prius might get inflated a little bit. You might think, yeah, I am glad I chose this car. It's really great. For the Civic, maybe you're thinking like, oh, you know what? I dodged a bullet there. That would have been kind of a bad car for me. But nothing about the cars has actually changed. The only thing that has changed is that you engaged in a behavior that you're having trouble justifying. So this is post-decision justification. You're making your decision seem better based on the way that you are thinking about these things. You're reducing that dissonance by that uncertainty of, oh, did I choose the right thing? By reassuring yourself, yeah, you did choose the right thing. So you're changing your attitudes to justify that decision. So those are the three types of dissonance. In the next video, I'm going to talk about things like magnitude of dissonance, the types of changes that might happen. So see you in that video.